In Hebrews chapter 8, the writer of Hebrews continues to make the case that Jesus is a better high priest. Why is that so important? Let's talk about that today in the Word. Good morning and welcome back to Today in the Word. Hi, I'm Glenn Schaefer. Thank you for joining us, and I want to welcome all of you who are listening in on our podcast. And if you are joining us on YouTube, thank you. If you've not subscribed, be sure and do so, and let's be notified and help get the word out. Today, we are entering into Hebrews chapter 8 as we are walking through this book. You're going to become very much aware, if not already, that the writer of Hebrews continues to hammer with this idea of Jesus being the perfect high priest. And then we have to ask, why is that so important? Number one, we as Gentiles do not think as those Christians would have who have a Jewish Hebrew background. For them, the high priest was the center of their sins being addressed and dealt with. The high priest represented them before God. The high priest went behind the veil once a year on the Day of Atonement. The high priest was the center of all that God was doing. And so to all of a sudden say that that has changed was a major thing. There better be a reason for it. So he keeps hammering away and giving these things his purpose. And we're going to see right here in chapter 8, when he starts, he says, okay, now this is the main point. And he begins to identify 7 specific areas that he thinks are the main points about Jesus being the high priest. So let's look at this beginning at verse 1 and 2 in Hebrews 8. Now this is the main point of things we are saying. We have such a high priest who is seated at the right hand of the throne of the majesty in the heavens, a minister of the sanctuary and of the true tabernacle, which the Lord erected and not man. So, right here, he gives us a summary. He said, now this is the main point, and these are the things that we are saying. What were they? Number one, we're going to see that Jesus as a high priest was seated at the right hand of the throne, but his place was in heaven, not on the earth. That means that he was a minister of the true tabernacle, number 2, which is the temple in heaven. Number 3, as a high priest, they offer sacrifices. Jesus offers a better sacrifice than that which is of the blood of bulls and goats. He offers himself. Number 4, Christ would not qualify for an earthly priesthood, so he has a different priesthood. Number 5, he has a more excellent ministry since he is of a different order. Number 6, he's a mediator of a better covenant. As Moses was a mediator, now Jesus is a mediator, but this time it's a better covenant. And lastly, the covenant that was established on better promises. Now that's what he's trying to say here. And when he begins by saying, this is the main point of what we are saying. These are the points. He starts in by saying, this high priest who is seated on the right hand of the throne. So Jesus is not only on the throne, we know that he's in heaven. So all of this is actuating, and all this is coming from the throne of heaven. And that he's a minister of the true tabernacle or the true temple, not that which is of the shadow here on the earth. And that's where we're reminded in Exodus 25, verse 8 and 7, where it says, and let them make me, this is what God is saying, let them make me a sanctuary that I may dwell among them according to all I show you, that is the pattern of the tabernacle and the pattern of all of its furnishings, so you shall make it. This is what God is saying to Moses, that he was to make a tabernacle on earth, which was a copy or a shadow of the furnishings and of the tabernacle itself. Now, this temple, this tabernacle that's in heaven, Obviously, it's made out of different materials, probably, than what he gave the instructions, because this on the earth is a shadow. But the furnishings and the tabernacle made here on the earth followed a pattern that existed in heaven. So that's why when it said that Jesus has a better high priest, he's in the real tabernacle or temple, and as the high priest, he's offering a sacrifice. Verse 3 says, "For every high priest is appointed to offer gifts and sacrifices. Therefore, it is necessary that this one also have something to offer." So they not only offered sacrifices for sin, but also gifts and worship. Well, what does this high priest have to offer? Well, he said this one has something better to offer. Since every high priest has to offer something, it's important that we see that he offered, what is that better sacrifice? Himself. The writer of Hebrews wants to emphasize that again. Now look at verse 4 and 5. "For if he were on earth, he would not be a priest, since there are priests to offer the gifts according to the law, who serve the copy of the shadow of the heavenly things, as Moses was divinely instructed when he was about to make the tabernacle. For he said, 'See that you make all things according to the pattern shown you on the mountain.'" What he's making a point here is that Jesus' priesthood had a temple, but it was a better temple. If he were here on the earth, he wouldn't even qualify for that inferior earthly ministry because they offered it according to the law. Jesus was announced and pronounced as the high priest. He also became our high priest through the things that he suffered on our behalf, coming to this earth as a human being, 100% God, 100% man, and yet he offered himself as that perfect sacrifice. So here on the earth, they just do what was a copy. And so the writer of Hebrews is trying to point out what you're holding up as superior is not superior at all. It's only a copy. It's only a shadow of the heavenly things that Jesus makes available. So how glorious then would this temple be? If the temple here on the earth was held up by those Jews as being so wonderful, it was remodeled by Herod after being destroyed, spent a good part of 40, 50 years remodeling that temple, that by the time Jesus came here on earth as his ministry, it was just being finalized. And no wonder they thought the temple was so brilliant. It was overlaid with gold. They said it glared like the noonday sun. From over at Mount Olives, you look back at the temple and it was just gorgeous, overlaid with gold, the sun hitting it. It was like heaven itself. They were so proud of it. You remember Matthew 24, the disciples said, "Jesus, isn't this a beautiful temple?" And Jesus comes right back and he says, "Not one stone here shall be left on top of another." And the writer of Hebrews points that out later, that is soon vanishing and passing away. So if they thought it was glorious, how much more is this temple in heaven glorious? The writer of Hebrews continues to make the point in verse 6 that Jesus presides over a more superior priesthood and covenant. Let's look at verse 6. "But now he has obtained a more excellent ministry, inasmuch as he is also mediator of a better covenant, which was established on better promises." So let's talk about this. This leads us into the study, the latter part of this chapter, on the new covenant itself. Here he's making his point that this is a better ministry, a more excellent ministry, in that he is a mediator, but this, as a mediator, Moses was to the old covenant. Now this is a better covenant. Because why? This covenant is established on better promises. Therefore, he has a more excellent ministry. So we see Jesus fulfilling the eternal covenant of God. We can see that in Hebrews chapter 13, verse 20, where it says, "Now may the God of peace, who brought up our Lord Jesus from the dead, that great shepherd of the sheep, through the blood of the everlasting covenant." So God makes an everlasting covenant. Jesus fulfills that through his blood. So when God made a covenant with Abraham, it was the promise that he made, that in chapter 12 of Genesis, that through his seed, all the families of the earth would be blessed. That's often called the Abrahamic covenant. Chapter 15 describes that covenant. It was the promise to what? Jesus. Because in his loins was the seed, not plural seeds, but singular seed. In his loins was the seed. So then Moses' covenant, or the Mosaic covenant, was a step toward that redemptive plan. You could say the same thing about David's covenant, or Davidic covenant, was yet another step towards that kingship that would come through Christ. So Christ then is the redemptive plan of God fulfilled in the new covenant. Now I like this because when we get further down in this chapter, we're going to reach over into Jeremiah and we're going to talk about the covenant and the law that's written in our hearts under this new covenant. So this one, talking about the new covenant, was established on better promises with a better covenant, therefore making it superior. I hope you get all of that. See, sometimes we as Gentiles think, man, what difference does it make? Well, let's take opportunity to meditate upon the value of what Christ has done and what he is doing for us as a high priest. Let's position ourselves in the fact that Christ has completed the work, offering himself as a sacrifice, sitting in the heavens on our behalf in the true tabernacle with a covenant of better promises. And that's what we live in. I trust you're strengthened as we walk through the book of Hebrews today in the Word.